Hi everyone, welcome to Difference Frames the World, a channel for you to find a real China. Today we would like to talk about a new topic. Why are the Chinese vaccines safer than American vaccines? To address the concerns of a lot of people about the vaccines of COVID-19 pandemic. To answer this question, we need to have a general idea of what the coronavirus is. Look at the walnut on the screen now. It has a kernel and a shell, very similar to the composition of a virus, which is essentially composed of a gene, or RNA, and a protein shell. Our immune systems recognize the protein shell and release appropriate antibodies to ultimately kill the viruses. Currently, 3 Chinese vaccines from Sinovac and Sinopharm adopt the inactivated technical route, which means that a culture of the new coronavirus is completed in the laboratory with its inactivated gene and the protein shell in the vaccine. Simply put, it is a dead virus that triggers the immune system to produce antibodies. This technical route has been used and tested for decades in the field of vaccine research and manufacturing, and it is much safer, although a little conservative. For example, the same inactivated technology was used to develop diphtheria vaccines for babies at birth. The technology used in the 2 U.S. vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, is called mRNA, a new technology that emerged in the past 2 years for the purpose of treating cancers initially. The mRNA vaccine does not have the protein shell of the virus, rather, it is only an artificial virus that carries the RNA gene and cannot be replicated inside the human body. After the vaccine is injected, the artificial virus invades normal cells and creates the same protein shell as the new coronavirus to trigger an immune response. Because the mRNA vaccine simulates the process of normal cells being invaded by non-replicable artificial viruses, this kind of vaccines have a high likelihood of causing greater adverse reactions than those traditional inactivated vaccines produced by Sinovac and Sinopharm. There have been 33 deaths in Norway after injections of the Pfizer vaccine, but we have to say that people cannot relate them directly to the Pfizer vaccine, because most of the deceased people are aged above 75 years old, and there are around 400 deaths every week in Norway's care homes. Anthony Stephen Fauci pointed out earlier that many patients were already very frail and could hardly go through the adverse effects of the vaccines. That is to say, he implied that it was the patient's problem, having very little correlation with those vaccines. Other side effects like facial paralysis, after receiving the Pfizer vaccine, were reported occasionally, but most of them healed after a certain time, like 2 weeks. The possible reason for that is the patient's nerve cells were invaded by the artificial viruses, and those invaded nerve cells were eventually attacked by the overreactive immune system. If the artificial viruses invade the immune cells, they may trigger disorders of the immune systems or evoke allergic reactions. Unfortunately, many patients die because of the overreaction of their own immune systems in the real world. The good part of the mRNA vaccines is that they cannot replicate themselves in the human bodies, so the overreaction of the immune systems can be limited to a lower and safer level. Apart from the side effects, mRNA vaccines have another drawback, which is fatal for developing countries. The vaccine, or the artificial virus, is vulnerable to heat, so the Pfizer vaccines need to be stored in a temperature around -70 degrees Celsius or lower, and the Moderna vaccines, around -20 or lower. The undeveloped countries can hardly find enough storages and refrigerated trucks to store and deliver this kind of vaccines. A lot of people might be curious why Pfizer and Moderna vaccines have to be mRNA, not the conservative, traditional inactivated vaccines, like the Chinese vaccines, which have not got any serious adverse effects reported. The real reason is very funny, indeed. That is, even the Western pharmaceutical manufacturers want to produce the inactivated vaccines, they do not have enough capacity to do that. As mentioned earlier, adopting the inactivated technology route to produce vaccines requires a large-scale culture of the viruses first, which is done in specific plants of stringent biosafety, but there is no need to do so for manufacturing mRNA vaccines. And this leads to the fact that inactivated vaccines are relatively easier to develop but more difficult to produce compared with the mRNA ones. In the whole world, only China and India have adequate capacity for producing inactivated vaccines, because Europe and US outsourced half of their vaccines to India because of the manufacturing exodus to low-cost regions. But India has also been virus-stricken with COVID-19 and has recorded over 10 million positive cases, with actual infected number way higher probably. India first policy at the critical moment makes the export of vaccines impossible. As a result, Western manufacturers have to find another way out by introducing the new mRNA technology to speed up the vaccine research. As we said in previous videos, vaccine research usually takes several years, but the quick spreading of COVID-19 urged various countries in the world to compete with each other to win the race. Many people do not understand why China was late by 1 month to announce the official use of its vaccines for mass inoculation domestically, and thus are not confident with the Chinese vaccines. Although the first outburst of COVID-19 was in China, Western scientists in research institutes and Western pharmaceutical manufacturers got all information needed to develop vaccines, as China released the genetic information of the new coronavirus to the world in early January 2020. We also mentioned several days ago in other videos that China controlled the spread of the epidemic so well that Chinese scientists could not test their vaccines in China, and they had no choice but to cooperate with other countries like Brazil, Turkey, UAE, Indonesia, etc. for the Phase 3 trials. If we take into consideration the time the Chinese spent negotiating with other countries, China is not late at all. By the way, China approved CoronaVac, the inactivated vaccine from Sinovac, for emergency use in its high-risk groups back in July 2020, which is far ahead of other vaccines developed in the West. Historically, there is a big gap between Chinese and Western vaccines, although Chinese doctors started experiments with vaccinating their patients in Tang Dynasty over 1,000 years before the West. Ancient Chinese doctors vaccinated patients based on their experiences, not on scientific research, so the vaccination technology was not systematically developed at all. China is the first country to use vaccines to fight smallpox, a fatal disease with a mortality rate as high as 25.5% that killed millions of people in the world. In Qing Dynasty, there were 3 emperors who suffered from this infectious disease, 2 of them died, and 1 survived. The one who survived is Kangxi, one of China's greatest emperors. He established a specific department to deal with smallpox, and 3 major vaccination methods were found to treat this disease. China mainland became the first in the world to eradicate smallpox in 1961, and a famous Chinese virologist with world renown, Tang Fei-fan, who committed suicide in 1958, is the greatest doctor in modern China making this happen. Mr. Tang should have been the first Chinese to win the Nobel Prize. But unfortunately, most people in the world, including 99% of the Chinese, forgot his name already. If viewers want to know him better, we can make a video to introduce him, to express our greatest gratitude to this Chinese doctor, who helped eradicate smallpox, the most fatal infectious disease, which had plagued human beings for thousands of years. China has been fighting various infectious diseases for centuries, but its vaccine manufacturing has always been suspected by West media. This time, it is a good opportunity for the world to know Chinese vaccines. India is also making inactivated vaccines now, but it will have to satisfy its domestic needs first, and will not be able to provide enough vaccines to the rest of the world in a short time. And also, there have been some reports about the side effects of the Indian vaccine recently. As for the Russian vaccine, it is an adenovirus vector vaccine. We do not have enough information yet, but Stephen Fauci expressed his worry several months ago about its efficacy. So in the short run, China's vaccines might be the safest vaccines, if not the best ones. And they may also be the only choice for a lot of developing countries, which cannot get Western vaccines. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and share this video with people you know. We publish videos on a daily basis, and will also publish long videos on topics viewers are interested in, once or twice a week. If you have anything want to share with us, please leave your comments below.